Welcome to Level Up Russellville, the show where we explore the great things happening to Russellville and the Arkansas River Valley. Sit back, relax, these opportunities are real, and you might even be able to take advantage of them yourself. Enjoy the episode.
With child advocacy centers, I think the biggest thing that we fear right now is just funding cuts and different things. And when money is taken away from a CAC, yes, it impacts people's jobs, but it affects the children. They're the ones that suffer from that, because every child that has been abused deserves the same level of treatment. And if you have to cut services to kids, it's like, how do you say these kids deserve to have services through a CAC, but these kids do not? And so I think that's the biggest thing that we're facing right now as an agency as a whole, but also locally. You know, this affects local children in our area that deserve to have those services. Things have been quite busy and busier than last year at this time. And why that occurs is sometimes beyond me. A lot of times it has to do with the education and the prevention that we're doing in the community to help people understand what child abuse is and how to report that child abuse.
Yeah, I remember us talking about that, and you said it's busier than normal. And you were saying it's not necessarily the world getting worse, it's just we're getting better at spotting it. Exactly.
And that's just like, we don't, trafficking is a big issue. We don't personally see a lot of that at the CAC, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that it's not being reported. People don't know what to look for. And I think we're getting better at educating people on what safe adults are. And so when a child does say something to them, whether it's behaviorally, whether it is literally saying it out loud, that they can recognize that and make that report. We do a lot of mandated reporting with the educators in the schools, but everybody needs to know about reporting, because now in the state of Arkansas, if you are 18 and older and you see some sort of abuse, whether it be physical or neglect or, sexual, if you see it occurring, you are automatically now a mandated reporter. And so it doesn't matter necessarily what your job is anymore, that you become a mandated reporter and can be held liable if they can prove that you knew about the abuse or had seen the abuse and did not report.
Really? What legislation passed that?
Yeah, that was back in, 25? That was back in 24. Was that last year? Is there a 23 or 24 that passed? And so that's something that, there's not a mechanism to educate the community on that. Unless you are a mandated reporter, no one gets that type of training. And that's where getting that information out to all aspects and all people. And, you'll see those little things where, these laws go into effect at such and such date, and you'll see them in the news. Very seldom do I didn't see that in any of them, that mandated reporter had changed. Then also, you're not allowed to make anonymous reports. That also changed at the same time. So used to, people could call the child abuse hotline and say, I don't want to leave my name and number, and they can do it anonymously. Now you can't do that. If you do not leave a name and number, you cannot make a report. And that is to cut down on those cases of malicious reporting. But then also, because when a call comes in and you make that report, I'd say it's like that telephone thing. And if I tell 10 people and I start here, well, if I tell one person, they tell next person, by the time it gets to the end, it's a different story. And so this way, we can talk, the investigator can talk to the person that made that report. And then that way they can get that firsthand information. Because the hotline worker, may do a wonderful job, but what if they failed to write something down, or the reporter, after they make the report, then say, oh, I wish I would have said X, Y, and Z. And so then the investigator can get all of the information directly from the person that's making the report. That really helps clarify a lot of information.
Okay, I can see why people would want that, but let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
What if my boss is doing something and then I spot it? I don't necessarily want my name. I don't want to get fired, you know?
Right. So by law, the investigator cannot tell the family that they're investigating who made that report. And people will say, oh, but they told me. No, they didn't. They can get fired for that. They're not going to tell you. However, what happens is sometimes people figure it out, basically, and it's like, you know, well, my child was only around this person over here, so it has to be that person. And so they just, you know, make it up in their mind that that's who reported it. And it may be, and then they go and confront that person, and it's like, I know you made this report. They told me you made this report. And that person's like, they weren't supposed to tell you that, you know. And it's like, you gave yourself away, you know. And so they do not tell them who made that report. Like I said, people can get smart and they can figure it out. Like, I'm the only person I told this to was this person over here. They had to be the one to report it. And they may or they may not have. But they've got to understand that they cannot tell them who made that report.
Yeah. Now, I guess as more people become aware and know how to report it, that, what's what I'm looking for? It like makes it harder for, say, what do you call it, the suspect? Is there a clinical term for him?
Yeah,
The abuser,
alleged offender.
The alleged offender, to know. Because if everyone around is watching then and knows what to look for, then I guess, I don't know. How do you weed out things, and I'm sure there's a really bulletproof method for this, but a child, like I have a 5-year-old, and he'll just say crazy things sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, like, my mom hit me.
Yeah.
And she didn't hit him.
Yeah.
But is it pretty easy to tell once, like, when you're looking at a serious case of it versus a kid that was just saying things?
Yes, because if a child has knowledge of things that they shouldn't have knowledge of, particularly in sexual abuse, if a 5-year-old, say use a 5-year-old, if a 5-year-old can tell me what something looks like, feels like, tastes like, experiences that they should not know at 5 years old. If they can tell me sexual things, then that tells me that they've either experienced something or they've seen something that they should not have seen. And so that's where kids can come in and say, you know, oh, well, my dad spanked me, and well, tell me about that. You know, and that's the biggest thing, is asking those open-ended questions and not channeling kids into a yes or no. Because the kids will say, and they just, because that's what they think you want to hear, you know. Or you get those kids that are in that no phase and tell you no on everything, and then you no. And so, you know, you kind of can pick up on those. And our interviewers are trained with child development to understand those things, because we will get kids will also get fanatical and use that fantasy when they're not real sure what you're asking, if you're asking something over their head, or they're just, you know, rambling because they think that's what you want to hear. We'll get, you know, I remember one time we had this little boy, and we were asking him, he said, well, you know, when's the last time you went to the doctor? Well, he starts talking about going to the doctor and how the doctor beat down the door, and then his dad threw the doctor through the, you know, and some of that is because the doctor appointment scared him. So in his mind, the doctor came and beat down the door. And then he wanted his dad to protect him from the doctor. And so in his mind, the dad threw the doctor through the wall. And so it's not that stuff happened, and it's not that he's lying. It's just that that's his fanatical mind at work. Now, the doctor did not abuse him or anything, but it was an experience that in his mind, that's what he wanted to happen, you know. And so we have to be real careful. Like you said, a 5-year-old says, mom hit him. And it could be that mom got mad at him, and that's what he feared was going to happen, is that mom was going to hit him. And so you have to really get back to the senses of things, and like when, how did that feel? Did anybody leave any marks on you? What color were those marks that were left? Because it's not against the law to spank your children in Arkansas. You just can't leave physical injuries on them. The marks are, you can leave minor or transient. So like if I spank my child and then my child tells someone that I beat him, and we interview the child, and well, what color were those marks? Oh, well, my butt was, red. Okay, well, was it red and then it turned other colors? Or was it red and they went away? If they're red and went away, that's minor or transient. That's not considered child maltreatment. But if the child says, yes, my bottom was black and blue and I couldn't sit down, that's not okay. And so we have to really look at, when you're interviewing them, to weed through some of that. And yeah, they might say, my dad threw the doctor through the wall, but then turn over here and be able to tell me about penetration of their private parts, when they shouldn't know what that what that is. And so we can look at what is typical behavior of a 5-year-old to be fanatical, and then what is actually things that they would not know, that they would not be able to understand or be able to verbalize if they had not experienced it. And so it does make it hard. And it also makes it hard when, because ultimately we are asking a child to tell every detail about their last sexual experience. And adults don't even, that's hard. That would be hard enough if you were even on one-on-one of somebody that you really didn't know, because these interviewers don't know these kids when they come in. And we're asking them to give that last sexual experience, and even in one-on-one with somebody you don't know very well, that would be very uncomfortable for an adult. That would be very hard. And that's what we're asking these kids to do. And so for them to, especially the young ones, to throw some of that fanatical stuff in there, we can say, they can give an experience and what happened next. Well, then I hit him and I kicked him and I punched him, and they didn't do that, but that's what they wanted to do, but trying to get them, did that really happen, or is that something you wanted to do, or something else? And then trying to help feed through some of that fanatical, because it's normal for a kid to say things, and it doesn't mean they're lying. It just means that may be what they wanted to happen, or things that they anticipate might have happened.
Mm-hmm. Would you say a majority of the time when you're working with a kid, is it sexual abuse, or are there times it's emotional, verbal, physical, not sexual?
Whenever you have child maltreatment, there's usually poly abuse happening. You're not going to have where it's just one type of abuse, because sexual abuse involves emotional abuse, because they're grooming these kids. They're teaching these kids things that they shouldn't be teaching them, or giving them experiences that they shouldn't have. And so they have multiple types of abuse that are happening. And so most of the kids and victims that we see are of sexual abuse nature, because if it is a neglect issue in the home, the investigator can go and take a picture of that, and you've got your evidence. With sexual abuse, there's not a whole lot of physical evidence most of the time. And so that child's statement is what can make or break a case. We have a case right now that the kid made a very good disclosure. It was a difficult one, but she made a very good disclosure. But she has such a hard time talking about it that getting her to take the stand is going to be very difficult, for her to do that. And so you might have those interviews that go really, really well, but then, it doesn't get prosecuted. And it's not that the prosecutors don't want to. It's just they don't have what they need to be able to go before a jury to, to make that happen. So most of what we see is sexual, but with that, you're going to see other types of abuse with that. Emotional neglect, those kinds, especially if you have a caregiver who is allowing that abuse to happen and is not protecting the child, there's normally going to be some sort of neglect or emotional abuse with that. And physical abuse, the severe physical abuse we see are the kids who are very, very hurt and or been choked and their breathing interfered with, those kind of things. Kids that generally get a spanking and bruises are left, we generally do not see those cases just because of the priority level. And then if there's a bruise, then an investigator can take a picture of that. You have your evidence there.
It really is. I don't know how you do what you do. Like it's. And lately, I've been seeing a lot of cases. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with Tim Griffin, the Attorney General.
Yes.
And he has a website where he'll put news articles out, and it seems like every other one is like some sort of child abuser, whether it's CSAM, whatever, And there's a lot of these disgusting people out there.
Very much so. And that's where the
death penalty was just passed too for people that I don't know exactly I don't know if it's just for anyone with that type of material or they have to physically enact on something, but
yes, there is. Right? Yeah, and I'm trying to think what the details of that are too, and I can't think of what they are. But yeah, there is. But the case, and I can't remember what they're, but the cases that those are going to be your far few between. We're not going to see every sex offender being put on death row. There's a thing there that what it can and cannot do. But as far as doing what we do, everyone, this job isn't for everybody, and it's not, and that's why it's really particular in who has these positions and who does these positions, because it's not something that anybody, and that's what's hard, is you're talking about seeing more and more of it in the news. You get a high-profile case, and this is because this is what will happen. We had a real high-profile case in our area recently, and then when you see something like that, then your eyes are opened, and so you're seeing more and more of them here. They're there, but we don't pay attention. It's kind of like when, I talk about, if we're talking about buying a washer and dryer, and then what happens on our phones, then these ads start popping up for those kind of things. And so when you click on links and when you do things, then you're going to see more of it, I think, because it's there. And in my world, we see it, we pay attention to it, but the general public doesn't pay attention to it unless something is drawn to it. And so when our prosecutor, posted and got the news going on that particular case with that little boy, it makes you pay attention. It's like, oh wow, there's a one over here, there's one over here. They're there. I promise you. It's just that you have something has keyed in to your mind, and now you're seeing more of it. And that's what we need to do. We've got to have more of those cases brought out into the community, so they know that this happens every day. We see these kind of cases. We interviewed 449 kids last year. Now, not every one of them made a disclosure. Some of them should have, but they weren't ready. Some of them did. Some of them got tried. Some of them were unsubbed, only because that the evidence wasn't there to support it. Did it happen? There's times that we know that it happened, but because of their burden of proof that they must have, there just wasn't enough. And then it gets to he said, she said, and you've got an adult versus a kid. And so a lot of times the adult is believed over the kid because the kid doesn't have the skills to put sometimes what they've experienced into language. Especially get a 3 and a 4-year-old. They don't know what sex is. They don't know. And we're not asking them, tell me about sex, but they don't know how to put, well, he touched me. Well, tell me about that. Well, he touched me, and they don't know, they don't have the words because they're not old enough to have those words. So then when they do have those words, that's when those cases can be acted on. But you can have a 3 or 4-year-old talk about him touching her on her private spots, but she doesn't know how to describe it because she doesn't have that vocabulary yet to describe what she's felt or what what happened.
So how do you think, what needs to happen to fix this and to like adjust the scales? Because I get what you're saying, like the kids, they can't articulate it. What can change? I mean, is there some sort of, I don't even know what, is there something that, whether it's a piece of technological innovation or just what can fix this problem?
One of the things that personally that I think all of us in this field would like to see is, so a child comes in and has a forensic interviewer with a trained person that interviews to not ask leading questions, knows how to ask the questions and get the information, non-leading, unbiased, because if they disclose or they don't disclose, yes, that's important to us, but that doesn't determine whether or not we have a job, kind of thing. There's not a pressure to make a child disclose.
And can a poor interview just like nullify that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like,
if you have a poor interview and there was something going on, and if an interviewer botches that interview, it could make the case fall apart. Absolutely. And so there's a lot of pressure, on our forensic interviewers for sure. But again, also, you never know when ones go to court, when not. But they come in for that interview, they give a great disclosure, they give that interview, and because that person is trained to do that person, that's their job every day, to talk to child abuse victims. And then it gets, law enforcement's involved, the investigator with the crimes against children are involved. They find it true. They turn it over to the prosecutor's office. They may or may not arrest the suspect. They interview the suspect. And then it gets to the prosecutor's office. Well, when they go to court, if it gets to that point, because there's a lot of cases too that plea before it ever gets to court that nobody hears about. Those don't get, they just don't get advertised as much. And so if this prosecutor then back up. The offender in these cases, the law says they have the right to face their accuser. Well, their accuser could be a 6-7-year-old child.
Maybe their child.
Exactly. And so the interview, if the interview that child gave to that investigator or to that forensic interviewer, if that interview could be played in court, I think we would help a lot more. Because what happened, because they're not allowed unless the defense attorney and the prosecutor both agree to play that tape, and a defense attorney's not going to want that for their person that they're representing. And so if they could play that in court and then follow up with questions with the child, or to, let that stand for what it is at times, I think we would see a lot more of people being found guilty. But when you get a 6-year-old child who, it tells you something and then it doesn't because of continuances and all of the other stuff that happens in a court case, it may be 2 years before it gets before the jury or an attorney or a judge. And so you're looking at a 6-year-old to an 8-year-old. Well, again, you tell me something happened to you, and then you have to get on a stand and talk about it 2 years later. It's difficult, and it's hard to remember all of those little details from being 6 to being 8. And so that makes it even more difficult. So if you could play the DVD.
Why can't they? It's against
the law won't let them. No, because it all goes back to hearsay. It goes back, and what irritates me is they can play an interview that a police officer did with an offender, but you can't play the interview with the child. And if we could change some of that, I think that we would, but the law prohibits it unless all parties agree to it. I've seen it happen, but it's very few and far between that they actually, so if they could play that interview that child had, the original interview, I think we would see a lot more cases being that, but right now it just doesn't work that way. And so it's the offenders, to a certain extent, almost have more rights than our victims do, because you can't just always go by what that kid says unless you can get that kid later on the stand to testify about what happened to them.
Yeah. I mean, so if they did play the interview, because you can go on YouTube and you can find like interrogation tapes, and a lot of those are very popular, like watching interrogation tapes of adult criminals.
Yes.
Is the concern of why it's illegal that this is, say, a 5-year-old child and they don't want that tape out there on YouTube?
So those tapes are very well protected. But also, if you have that sort of case, you would close the courtroom. A lot of those cases, the courtroom is closed anyway, and so they're not, because of the nature of, and for trying to protect that victim as much as possible. I don't think that that's necessarily I've not heard anybody give that a reason for that happening. I mean, it's definitely a good thought, but those tapes and DVDs are protected. Like, for instance, if a defense attorney comes to me and says, I need a copy of that DVD, one, they'll get it from the prosecutor's office. But if they want it, then I have to have a protective order signed by the judge that says that they can see this, but they can't second release it to anybody. They can't show it to me. It is for them only, for them to help, build their case for their client, but those tapes can't be given out there. I have to have, like I said, a protective order signed by a judge in order to give anybody one beyond an investigator or the prosecutor's office.
That makes sense. I was just wondering, like, I like to think that people, like, why is this rule here? Maybe there was a good reason. Maybe it still needs to be changed. But if you're saying the courtroom is closed anyways, that's weird. That would be considered illegal just because isn't it considered evidence, or no, it's not?
Well, it's something that has to be turned over. I mean, like to a defense attorney, all of that has to be, disclosed. But it's one of those things that, which it's like they deem it as hearsay, and because it's not coming straight from the child's mouth in a courtroom. It's a video that was done before, et cetera, and they deem those videos as hearsay. But again, like I said, the thing that frustrates me about that is they can play an interrogation interview, but they can't play that child's interview.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Mm-mm. Do you think it's technically a problem with, like, what if a police officer was the one conducting the interview with the child? Would it then be looked at differently? Or is it just because it was a child, it was some years ago?
I don't know. I don't think because it's the victim you can't play them. But I don't know. That's definitely a question to ask. I don't know.
So if there was going to be
if it's
change,
a victim, and again, I'm not saying that an offender should not be able to face their accuser, and I get that, but we're talking about kids. We're not talking about adults. We're talking about kids that have been taken advantage of, that have been, abused. We're not talking about, a forgery thing or, even a robbery. We're talking about kids. We're talking about them having rights, their protection, because the abuse that has happened to them will change them for the rest of their lives if we don't get them the help that they need. And then to throw them on the stand with a defense attorney who knows nothing about talking to kids, probably, that just, it's horrible on these kids to have to go through that. So not only were they abused, now they're having to relive it in a courtroom, in front of numerous people. And not all kids are capable of doing that. The emotional trauma that has happened to them just from the sexual abuse is enough to make a child shut down and not be able to get on that stand. Because if you don't have a strong victim, there's no case. And that's what's hard. That's why, unfortunately, a lot of these cases don't get prosecuted that should be prosecuted, but it's only because a prosecutor doesn't have the evidence that they need. And so when these cases, if they're unfounded or they're not prosecuted, and people say, oh, well, that was unfounded, they made that up, just because it's unfounded doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that there was not a victim able to give the kind of disclosure that was needed. Because you have a 3-year-old, you can't put a 3-year-old on the stand, and so it's quite possible, unless there's something there that can be used to corroborate what that child says, or somebody comes forward that saw something happen or knows for a fact that something happened. That's why a lot of these cases just fall through the cracks like that. Because I promise you, it's not that it's not out there. So even though you're talking about, I see more of it in the news, there's a lot more where those came from that never make it to the news.
So if this law was going to change, who would that have to happen at the Arkansas state legislative level, I guess?
Yeah, it would have to be somebody that would be willing to work with the investigators and the CACs to implement, and pass something that would allow that to happen. Yeah.
It kind of pisses me off. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. That's one of the things that I always say, that if I ever quit this job, because this is where, God has led me to be, but that is the one thing, the lack of prosecution. And I'm not dogging the prosecutors at all. I'm really not. It's the system that prevents that prosecutor from really doing a justice for these kids that we have. And if that's one thing that just makes me so mad, that we don't get justice for these kids. And like, I had a kid, a young lady that I had interviewed, and she had gave a great disclosure, but he adamantly denied it. He always did it when nobody else was around, and it was just him and her. And there were little sisters in the home, but they were too little to, understand what was going on. And she gave a great disclosure, but he adamantly denied it. There was absolutely no physical evidence, and there was no way, no one to corroborate, because her sisters were little. There was no one to corroborate anything. He was good. He was a groomer. He groomed her. He acted totally normal when anybody else was around, but it was behind closed doors. And it was investigated. We felt very strongly that this had actually happened. It was true, but it was unfounded. Not that it didn't happen, but there was just not the burden of proof to be able to find it true. And then you go forward a few years, and now it's happening to her little sisters. And so we bring her, it's now reported on her little sisters. She comes in, and she is livid, because she's like, I tried to tell you people, and now you want to listen. Now that you have another victim, when I tried to protect my little sisters, and now we have another victim, and now you want to do something about it. And she was mad, because now I think she was now then 14 when she came back in. And we had but then we have the opposite case where we had a young lady come in, and deny, deny, deny. We felt in our hearts something's happened to her. This report is true, but she won't talk about it. She will not disclose. And so it was unfounded because she didn't disclose. Fast forward a few years, now it's reported that it's happening to her little sisters. Bring her back in, and now she's telling all. It's like, why didn't you tell when you had a chance? And she said, well, because I thought if I could keep him focused on me, that he would leave my little sisters alone. But now that he's doing it to my little sisters, now I know I must speak up. And so you have two totally separate situations. And so you've got one that tells and nothing happens, and you've got one that doesn't tell and it still continues to happen. So, it's like when you have those that they tell and nothing happens, and if it keeps happening, what's their, I get kids that we've interviewed numerous times and they deny, and then finally, like by the third report, they finally tell, and it's like, well, nobody was going to believe me. And it makes it hard on prosecution, because now you've got two reports where the kid denied, and now they're saying it's true. The defense attorney can take that and use that against the child, and it's just not fair, because we expect kids to be adults when it comes to victims, as a victim. We expect them to have the language. We expect them to have the maturity. We expect them to be able to tell the same story 2 years later on a stand, and we expect way too much of them than developmentally that they're capable of a lot of times when it comes to child abuse cases.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like when I was the story I'm about to tell, I'm like 14 years old, so I'm much older than the people you're describing. I got in trouble at school, got in a couple fights, and there was the story that I told people, like it was slightly altered. So I was worried I'd get in trouble, because you're like, oh, I don't want to get in trouble, so maybe I'll leave out a detail or two. So yeah, I get that, like these kids can't be expected to. There's a lot going on in a kid's head.
Absolutely.
Especially when it's someone that has power over them, which is, would you say most of the time?
Oh, yes,
because
yes, because in 90% of your cases, and over 90%, the alleged victim knows their alleged offender. It's not, I say this all the time, I grew up in the stranger danger area. Don't follow the guy in the van with, looking for his puppy. We still have to teach kids that. But that's not who's abusing our children. I've interviewed over 2,500 kids in my career, and I can tell you on one hand the number of kids that it was a stranger. The strangers are the ones that are kidnapping our kids, and we never find them again. Those are the strangers. These people have some sort of contact with these kids, whether it be a caregiver in any aspect, or a family friend, or somebody that has a relationship. They don't just randomly go and assault the children. They groom that child because they want that child to enjoy it, because they want sexual gratification out of it. And so they groom that child because they don't want that number one, they don't want the child to tell. And they're pretty smart. We'll have one victim in a family, but the offender left all the other kids alone. Well, then when you can interview the kids, and like you'll have one that is very mouthy and, doesn't put up with anything, and that, oh yeah, no, he showed me a picture one time, but I told him that was gross and I walked away. Well, he knows that's not my next victim, because that victim doesn't want to participate. That victim's mouthy, they'll tell somebody. So they choose the children that don't freak out when you try to groom them, and or they gain their trust. We get a lot where I've had it's one of those themes that always stick out in my head. Well, he was teaching me how to drive. And so then we pulled off on the side of the road, or he would put his hand on my leg while I was driving. And, and a parent, if it's somebody that's not in the family, a parent's like, oh, thank goodness someone else teaches them how to drive and I don't have to. There's themes that we see when they pay attention to one child over another child in your home. That child's special to them. There's lots of those red flags out there that people just don't pay attention to, and people who are good at grooming children don't see them. They don't see it as grooming. Or I had my son, one of his best friends, his dad is now a registered sex offender. And if you would have asked me before that, I would be like, no, he is a professional individual. He has a degree. He has a professional job in the community. I would have never, ever thought that he was doing stuff like that to his daughter. Never. And so you never, ever know. We have to stay vigilant on those because they know how to get away with it, unfortunately. And I guarantee you is if you find somebody that is now 50, 60 years old and now they're, being charged with, sexual stuff with a child, that was not their first victim. You don't wake up at 50, 60 years old and go, I'm attracted to children now. I want a child. It doesn't work that way. They've had other victims. It's just you just don't know. You don't know about it. No one's come forward yet. There's so many more victims out there that we just don't know about yet because they haven't come forward, because they've not had that person, that safe person to go to tell. And so where we can't change the past, by teaching kids about safe adults and teaching adults to be those safe adults for kids, it's not going to change.
Well, we got a few minutes left. What would you like to leave the community with as far as maybe a call to action?
I think right now we have a plea out there is hope on repeat. That we want to continue to give these kids hope. And without the support of the community, we can't do that. So whether it is becoming a monthly donor to the Child Advocacy Center, because when you donate to a Child Advocacy Center, you're donating to a child. You're donating to that child being given the support, being given the resources, whether it's therapy, whether it's a sexual assault exam, whether it's prevention in the classroom, to knowing that abuse is not okay and that they can tell and that they are not at fault, it's not their fault, or whether it's that interview that helps put somebody behind bars to help that stop, so that abuse does stop. So when funding is provided to a CAC, that's what you're funding. You're funding that child and their future. Because if no one steps up to the plate, that abuse will affect the rest of their lives, and we want to stop that. So whether it is, again, being a monthly donor, or whether it is, participating in a fundraiser that we do, all of those things are so important, but it's for the child abuse victim. It's to help that child in that future endeavor so that they can have a happy life. And what we call it, hope on repeat, because we want to give that hope to a child every single day.
Hope on repeat. I like it. People can do that on y'all's website?
Yes.
Is it rivervalleycac.org?
Very good.
Awesome.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by our partners and collaborators in the Arkansas River Valley. If you've enjoyed this episode, visit rvtownsquare.com. Give us an email, a text, a call. Let us know who you want to see on the show next. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.